She was a personal slave. The human freed her and later made her his wife. HFY sci-fi story. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story, one that will test the very meaning of freedom, love, and redemption. What happens when a human risks everything to save an alien slave? Let's find out. The palace of the Tan Dominion stood like a massive fortress, gleaming walls towering high above the sprawling city beneath. Inside, the halls were cold and silent, echoing with the steps of those who lived in privilege. But it wasn't just the opulence that made this place so cold. It was the lives trapped within its walls. Among them was Thalia, a young alien woman, forced into servitude as a personal slave. Her skin, the color of deep emerald, shimmered faintly under the cold lights of the palace. But her eyes told a different story, dark, haunted, and full of sorrow. For years, she had been at the mercy of Lord Varen, a cruel and heartless ruler of the Tan Dominion. He treated her as little more than property, using her for his amusement, his needs, and his desires. Every day was the same, painful, degrading, and endless. She had long given up on hope, resigning herself to the fact that this was her life now. Thalia had no name to her captor, no identity. She was just a slave, and to him, a tool to be used. But that day, everything changed. Enter Jaxon Miller, a soldier from Earth. His mission was simple: provide security for Lord Varen during a diplomatic visit. He had no idea about the horrors Thalia was enduring. To him, the palace was just another job, another assignment. He had seen many things in his military career, but nothing could prepare him for what he witnessed when he saw Thalia for the first time. Her appearance caught his attention. Her beauty, though marred by the chains that bound her, was undeniable. But it wasn't just her looks that struck him. It was the sheer sense of hopelessness that radiated from her. Jaxon couldn't ignore the way she was treated. He had been hired to guard the palace, but his sense of right and wrong wouldn't let him stand by and do nothing. As he watched Thalia being humiliated by Lord Varen in the Grand Hall, something inside him snapped. He couldn't stand by and watch another soul suffer. Without thinking, Jaxon intervened, stepping between Thalia and her tormentor. The action was reckless, but it was something he couldn't take back. Lord Varen had laughed at the human's intrusion, but the truth was, Jaxon was a trained soldier, and in that moment, he was ready to fight for Thalia, ready to risk his life for someone he barely knew. It was in this moment that Thalia, despite herself, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. She couldn't understand why a human would care. In her world, compassion was a foreign concept. But here, before her, stood Jaxon, offering her something she never thought she would have again: freedom. He spoke to her softly, his voice calm but firm, promising that he would get her out of this hellhole. Thalia wanted to believe him, but after everything she had endured, it was hard to trust anyone, let alone a human. She had been hurt too many times before. Still, she found herself following him, unable to resist the pull of what seemed like a distant dream. They escaped under the cover of darkness, slipping away from the palace, out into the cold night. As they moved through the city, Jaxon helped her, always keeping watch, making sure they weren't followed. Thalia didn't speak much. She was too afraid of what might happen if they were caught. But inside, her heart was beginning to change. For the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. She felt safe. It was the first step towards something new, something she could hardly imagine. But she was still wary. She couldn't let herself believe that Jaxon would truly be the one to save her. There was too much pain in her past, too much mistrust. But Jaxon was persistent. Every day, he showed her a kindness she had never known. He didn't expect anything in return. He didn't demand anything from her. He just wanted to help. And, slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to crack. For the first time, Thalia began to wonder, could she trust him? Could this human truly offer her the one thing she had always longed for, freedom? But there was still a long road ahead, and they were far from safe. Little did they know, the true danger was just beginning. and the price for their freedom might be higher than they could ever imagine. After escaping the palace, Jaxon and Thalia found themselves in a hidden corner of the city, far from the watchful eyes of Lord Varen's soldiers. The night was cold, and the streets were eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of city life echoing in the background. Jaxon kept a sharp eye on their surroundings, aware that they could be caught at any moment. He glanced at Thalia, who was still silent beside him, her emerald skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. The weight of what they had just done hung heavy in the air. For the first time in years, Thalia was free, but the price of that freedom was yet to be determined. Jaxon knew they couldn't stop now. He had to get her to safety, no matter the cost. Days passed, and with each one, Jaxon and Thalia found themselves growing closer. They had been moving from one abandoned building to another, staying just one step ahead of the Tan Dominion's soldiers, always on the run, always looking over their shoulders. Despite the constant danger, Jaxon made sure that Thalia was safe, that she had food and water, and that she could rest. As for Thalia, she slowly started to trust him, though her past continued to haunt her. She couldn't shake the feeling that freedom was just a dream, something she didn't deserve. But as the days went by, she began to question that belief. Could she really have a future beyond the chains that had bound her for so long? Could a human like Jaxon really be different from the others who had hurt her? One evening, as they settled in a small cabin on the outskirts of a remote town, Jaxon sat down beside her, breaking the silence. "I know it's not easy," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "And I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I want you to know something. Everything I've done for you, I've done because it's right. You deserve a life that's yours, a life where you're not someone's possession." Thalia looked at him, her heart aching. She had heard those words before, but never from someone who actually seemed to mean them. "But how do you know I'm worth it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know I deserve to be free? I've spent my entire life being treated like I'm nothing, like I don't matter." Jaxon shook his head gently. "No one deserves that. Not you, not anyone. You're stronger than you know. You've survived things that would have broken most people, and yet here you are, still standing. That makes you worthy of something better." Thalia felt a tear slip down her cheek, a tear she hadn't expected. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by the vulnerability she felt in front of him. But Jaxon didn't look away. He simply sat there, offering her the quiet comfort of his presence. It was the first time in so long that she had allowed herself to feel anything other than fear and anger. Slowly, over time, Thalia began to open up more to Jaxon. She shared stories of her past, of the life she had been forced to live, and the things she had lost. She talked about her family, who had been taken from her when she was young, about the years spent in servitude, and the hopelessness that had consumed her. And with each word she spoke, Jaxon listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He simply listened, and in doing so, he helped her heal in ways she hadn't thought possible. One day, as they sat together by a campfire, Jaxon turned to her with a serious expression. "I know things are still dangerous," he said. "We can't stay here for long, and we have to keep moving. But I want you to know that I'll never stop fighting for you. I don't care what it takes." Thalia studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. He was unwavering, determined. And in that moment, she realized that she was no longer just a prisoner running from her past. She was a person with a future, and maybe, just maybe, Jaxon was the one person who could help her find it. As the days turned into weeks, they continued their journey, always looking over their shoulders, but always pushing forward. There were still close calls, still moments where they had to hide and fight to survive, but with every passing day, Thalia felt herself becoming stronger, more confident in herself, and in the bond she had with Jaxon. Their relationship had shifted from mere survival to something deeper, something more real. Thalia had never expected to feel love again, not after all that had happened to her. But Jaxon had shown her a different kind of love, the kind that didn't come with strings attached, the kind that wasn't tainted by control or abuse. It was love born from respect, from understanding, and from shared experiences. As they sat under the stars one night, looking up at the vastness of the sky, Thalia turned to him. "I never thought I'd be here," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd be free. But here I am. And it's because of you." Jaxon smiled, his hand brushing hers gently. "You don't owe me anything, Thalia. You're free because you deserve it. You always have been. Thalia smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper. For the first time in years, she felt like she could finally breathe. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the danger was far from over. But for the first time, Thalia believed that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her after all. The days continued to pass as Jaxon and Thalia made their way through the dangerous, unknown lands, always staying just ahead of their pursuers. They were tired, hungry, and on edge, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered. Despite the constant fear of being found, Thalia felt a strength inside her that she had never known before. She was no longer the scared, broken slave who had been forced to serve others. She was a woman with a future, and for the first time in years, she could see a way out of the darkness. One evening, as they stopped to rest in a small cave by the edge of a dense forest, Jaxon sat down beside her. His face was tired, his eyes heavy, but there was a determination in his gaze that never wavered. "We've been running for a long time, Thalia," he said quietly, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "We can't keep running forever. We need a plan, a place where we can rest and rebuild." Thalia looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can trust anyone else, Jaxon," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been betrayed before. I've seen what people are capable of." Jaxon nodded, his expression softening. "I know, but not everyone is like that. We can't live in fear forever. You deserve peace, a place where you're not always looking over your shoulder." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I know a place. It's not far from here. We can get there if we move quickly, but we need to take the risk." Thalia hesitated. The thought of finding a safe place was tempting, but she wasn't sure if she could trust him completely. Despite everything he had done for her, there was still a part of her that was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of the unknown. But something about Jaxon made her want to take that chance. For the first time in a long while, she let herself hope. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "Let's do it. But we have to be careful." Jaxon smiled, a small but genuine smile. "We will be. I'll make sure of it." They packed up quickly, gathering what little they had left, and set off into the night. The path was treacherous, and they moved quietly through the dense forest, avoiding any patrols or possible threats. As the night wore on, Thalia felt the weight of her past slowly start to lift. She had been running for so long, but with Jaxon by her side, she began to believe that maybe there was a chance for her to find a place of peace. The forest seemed endless, but eventually, they reached a small village nestled in a valley between two mountains. It was isolated, peaceful, and far from the dangers that lurked in the larger cities. Jaxon led Thalia to a small cabin at the edge of the village, a place where they could rest and recover. The cabin was simple but warm, with a small fire burning in the hearth. The walls were made of rough-hewn wood, and the scent of pine filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the cold, empty halls of the palace where Thalia had spent so many years. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could relax. She could breathe. As they sat by the fire, Jaxon turned to her, his expression serious. "This is just the beginning, Thalia. We can't stay here forever, but for now, we have time to think and plan." Thalia nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at her. She had never asked for this life. She had never wanted to be free at the expense of others. She knew that taking risks could mean putting others in danger. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said quietly. "I don't want to cause trouble." Jaxon reached over and placed a hand on hers, his touch gentle and reassuring. "You're not causing trouble, Thalia. You're saving yourself. You have every right to live the life you deserve." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Thalia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude, and something more, something deeper. She had never felt this kind of connection with anyone before, and it scared her. But it also gave her hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life beyond the pain and the fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Jaxon smiled softly. "You don't have to worry about that. I'll always be here for you, Thalia. Always." As they sat together, the warmth of the fire glowing between them, Thalia finally allowed herself to relax. She had been through so much, but in this moment, She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about the future. A future where she was free, a future where she could choose her own path. And maybe, just maybe, that future would be with Jaxon by her side. As days turned into weeks, Jaxon and Thalia settled into their temporary home in the small village. But despite the peace it offered, they knew they couldn't stay forever. They had found a semblance of safety, but they were constantly reminded of the dangers lurking outside the village. The Tandominion's reach was vast, and their escape had surely not gone unnoticed. The world outside was still full of threats. Thalia had never felt such comfort in all her life, and yet the fear of being caught again gnawed at her every day. She had spent so many years in captivity that the idea of freedom, real freedom, felt like something too good to be true. Her mind raced with doubts. Could she truly live a life beyond the shadow of the palace? Could she really trust Jaxon, a human who had come into her life so unexpectedly? As much as she had begun to rely on him, part of her still held back, unsure if she was worthy of the peace they had found. But Jaxon was relentless in his support, never once wavering in his commitment to her. One morning, as they sat together in front of the fire, Jaxon broke the silence that had settled between them. "Thalia, I know you're scared," he said gently, his voice soft but firm. "But we can't keep running forever. We need to make a plan, find a way to fight back. You don't deserve to live in fear any longer." Thalia looked at him, her heart heavy. She had never been given the opportunity to make choices for herself. For so long, she had been a pawn in someone else's game, and the idea of taking control of her own fate was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I've never been in control of anything. I've always been told what to do, forced into a life I didn't want. How can I possibly change that now?" Jaxon reached out, taking her hand in his. "You already have, Thalia," he said. "You've taken the first step by walking away from that life. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right beside you every step of the way. We'll figure it out together." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Thalia felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of hope and fear, rising within her. She wasn't used to having someone believe in her, especially not after everything she had endured. For the first time in her life, she felt like she might actually be capable of something more. "What if they come after us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we can't outrun them?" Jaxon squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. "Then we fight. We don't back down, but we do it smart. We find allies, we gather information, and we make sure that when the time comes, we're ready." For the first time, Thalia felt a spark of determination. The fear was still there, but so was something else, something that had been buried deep inside her for so long. The will to fight for herself, to take her life back. It was a small spark, but it was enough. "I'm ready," she said, her voice strong. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, Jaxon and Thalia began to make plans. They would move through the surrounding towns, speaking to trusted individuals, gathering information about the Tandominion's movements, and looking for any sign of rebellion or resistance that might help them. It wasn't going to be easy, but they knew that this was their chance to truly be free. But even as they made their plans, Thalia couldn't shake the sense that time was running out. The longer they stayed in the village, the greater the risk of being discovered. They needed to act quickly. On the night they were set to leave, a heavy storm rolled in, making the decision to move even more urgent. Jaxon packed their things quickly, and they slipped out into the night, the rain pouring down in sheets. As they made their way through the darkened streets, Thalia couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would take control of her own destiny. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about fighting for a life she had never thought possible. The storm raged around them as they made their way to the outskirts of the village, where Jaxon had arranged for a safe transport to take them to the next town. As they waited for the vehicle to arrive, Thalia turned to Jaxon, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are we really ready?" Jaxon smiled at her, his eyes filled with reassurance. "We're ready, Thalia, and I'll be with you every step of the way." As the vehicle arrived, they climbed aboard, and Thalia felt a sense of finality wash over her. This was it. No more running. No more hiding. She was taking control of her life. And for the first time, She believed that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that was truly hers. As the transport vehicle rumbled through the stormy night, Thalia couldn't help but glance over at Jaxon. The world outside the vehicle was a blur of rain and shadows, but inside, it was oddly calm. She had made the decision to move forward, but now that they were in motion, she couldn't escape the rush of doubt that flooded her thoughts. Could they really make it? Could she really live a life without the constant fear of being found? The path ahead seemed endless, uncertain, and every turn they took led into more unknowns. She glanced at Jaxon, who was staring ahead, his face set in determination. He had always seemed sure of their journey, but in that moment, Thalia wondered if he too was just hiding his own fear behind his resolve. "You're thinking too much," Jaxon said, his voice calm and comforting as he turned to look at her. "I know this feels like a huge step, but we're doing the right thing. We can't keep looking back. You're free now, Thalia. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Thalia met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. There was none. Jaxon truly believed they could make it. That thought lingered in her mind, giving her just the faintest hint of hope. But the doubt still gnawed at her. The further they went, the more she felt like she was crossing a line, one that couldn't be undone. She had always been a survivor, someone who had to keep moving, keep adapting to the next horrible thing that came her way. But for the first time, she wasn't just running from her past. She was running towards something, towards a life that she had always thought was impossible. As the night passed, they finally reached the next town. It was quiet and dark, with only the distant hum of activity breaking the stillness. Jaxon led Thalia to a small inn on the edge of the town, where they could rest before moving forward. The inn was humble, with simple furnishings and the comforting smell of wood and fire. They didn't talk much that night, both of them too exhausted from the long journey, but in the silence, Thalia allowed herself to think. She thought of her old life, of the chains, of the years of abuse, and of the emptiness that had filled her heart for so long. But she also thought of Jaxon, of the kindness he had shown her, of the way he had never once treated her as anything less than a person. She thought of the hope he had given her, the belief that she could be more than just a slave. In the darkness, with the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth, Thalia realized something. She was no longer that frightened, broken girl. She wasn't the person who had to live in fear, who had to hide in the shadows. She was someone new, someone who could choose her own path. And maybe, just maybe, she could walk that path beside Jaxon. The next morning, they continued their journey, their steps lighter than before. As they traveled, Thalia began to feel more like herself, the pieces of her past slowly falling into place. There was still much to fear, much to overcome, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of agency. They had a mission now, a purpose. They weren't just running, they were fighting for something worth having. And every time Jaxon looked at her, she felt a little less broken, a little more whole. As they moved through the rugged terrain, Thalia began to learn how to navigate the world around her, not just as someone trying to survive, but as someone who could shape her future. She started speaking to people they met along the way, asking questions, gathering information. Jaxon taught her how to listen, how to read between the lines of what people said, how to sense when someone could be trusted. It wasn't easy, but with every new encounter, Thalia began to realize just how much she had been missing. The world was full of people who didn't just want to use her, people who could offer her support, people who could help her rebuild the life she had lost. They found an ally in a local merchant, a woman who had heard whispers of the rebellion against the Tan and was willing to help. She provided them with supplies and a safe place to stay for a while, a much-needed respite before they moved on. Thalia was struck by the woman's kindness, her willingness to stand against the tyranny of the Tan. The rebellion wasn't just a distant hope, it was a real force, one that was slowly gathering strength. And Thalia, for the first time in a long time, began to feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just escaping anymore. She was fighting for something, freedom, justice, and a future that didn't have to be defined by the horrors of her past. As they prepared to leave the merchant's home, Thalia stood at the door, looking back one last time. She felt a sense of belonging, a sense that she was finally where she was meant to be. With Jaxon by her side, she was no longer just running. She was ready to stand, to fight, and to live. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Thalia felt like she had a future at all. The journey had become more dangerous with each passing day, and yet, despite the growing threats, Thalia felt a sense of determination that she had never known before. She had left behind the life of a slave, and now, she was walking a path that was entirely hers. Every step she took, every new person they encountered, solidified her belief that there was something better waiting for her, something worth fighting for. Jaxon continued to lead the way with quiet confidence, never once showing fear or doubt. His presence gave her strength, and every time he looked at her, she felt a connection that grew deeper by the day. But the danger they faced was still very real. They had been moving through rugged terrain, avoiding heavily patrolled areas and towns known to support the Tan Dominion. The further they went, the more Thalia realized that their fight was not just about escaping. It was about taking back their freedom, about making sure that the future they both dreamed of could become a reality. After a week of traveling in secrecy, they finally reached a small town on the outskirts of the Dominion's territory. It was isolated, tucked away in the hills, a place that had long been forgotten by the larger forces. Jaxon had heard whispers of it before, an underground group of rebels who had been working to destabilize the Tan Dominion's rule. The people there were wary of strangers, but Jaxon knew they had to take the risk. "We'll need to approach carefully," he said, his voice low. "The people here are secretive, but they might have information or resources we can use." Thalia nodded, her heart racing at the thought of meeting others who were fighting for the same cause. It had always been just the two of them, and now, they were about to step into a world that had been hidden from them. The town was smaller than Thalia had expected, with winding, narrow streets and homes that looked as if they had been built long ago. The air was thick with tension, and every face they passed seemed to carry the weight of years of struggle. Jaxon led her to a small tavern at the edge of the town, where they were told they could find the rebel leader. The inside was dimly lit, with a few patrons sitting quietly at the bar, their conversations hushed. The barkeep, an older man with graying hair and a stern expression, didn't ask any questions when they entered. Instead, he simply motioned for them to follow him into a back room. Inside, they found a woman sitting at a table, her back to them. She was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to see through them both, and a presence that commanded attention. "You must be the ones I've heard about," she said without turning. "Jaxon Miller and Thalia, the runaway slave. You've come looking for help, I assume." Jaxon nodded, his posture tense but respectful. "We've been on the run, trying to find a way to fight back. We need allies, resources, and information. We've heard that you have some of that." The woman finally turned to face them, her eyes narrowing as she studied Thalia. "You've been freed, but not by choice," she said, her voice sharp. "I can see the fear in your eyes, Thalia. You're not ready to lead yet, but you've got something most people don't. A fire. You're not just running anymore." Thalia looked at her, unsure of what to say. She had never been praised for anything. "I don't know if I can lead," she admitted, her voice low. "I've spent my life in fear. I've never been in control of my own fate." The woman leaned forward, her eyes softening slightly. "The problem with the Tan Dominion isn't just their army or their politics. It's their belief that people like you, people like us, are not worth saving. You've been broken, but you're stronger than they think. And you've got something the rest of us need, courage. You've made it this far, haven't you?" Thalia nodded, though she felt the weight of her past bearing down on her. Could she really do this? Could she lead others into a fight for freedom, knowing the pain and loss she had endured? Jaxon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his eyes steady. "We're ready to fight," he said firmly. "We just need the right tools and the right people. We can't do it alone." The woman studied them for a long moment before standing up. "Then we'll fight together," she said. "But know this, it won't be easy. The Dominion is ruthless, and they'll stop at nothing to crush any rebellion. You'll need to be ready." Thalia felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose. She had been running for so long, but now, she was ready to fight back. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. With Jaxon by her side and the rebels now in their corner, they had a chance, a real chance, of defeating the forces that had taken everything from her. As they left the tavern, Thalia felt a flicker of hope in her heart. The road ahead was long, and the battle would be hard, but for the first time, She wasn't just surviving. She was living, and she would fight for the future she deserved. The days that followed were filled with planning, strategizing, and preparing for the fight ahead. Thalia had never imagined herself in such a position, no longer a victim, but a leader among those who were fighting to overthrow the Tan Dominion. Every day, the rebels trained and gathered supplies, while Jaxon and Thalia did their part, learning about the movements of the Dominion and the best places to strike. Thalia still had moments of doubt, moments where the weight of leadership threatened to crush her. But each time, she reminded herself of the reason they were doing this: freedom, not just for her, but for everyone who had been oppressed by the Dominion. One morning, as Thalia stood outside the rebel camp, looking out over the rolling hills in the distance, Jaxon approached her. His face was more serious than usual, and his eyes were filled with a quiet intensity. "We've gotten word of a major supply convoy heading out from the Dominion's main base," he said, his voice low. "It's the perfect target for our first big strike. If we can hit it, we'll cripple their supply lines and make them think twice about pushing forward. It's a risky move, but it could give us the upper hand." Thalia nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. She had never been in charge of such an operation before, but the stakes were higher now. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The convoy had to be stopped. "We do it," she said, her voice steady. "We hit them hard, and we send a message. It's time we show them that we're not afraid." As the plan came together, Thalia felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure the Tan Dominion understood that their reign of terror would come to an end. The day of the attack arrived, and the rebels moved under the cover of darkness, using the terrain to their advantage. Jaxon led the charge, with Thalia right behind him, her heart pounding in her chest. They had trained for this moment, but the reality of battle was nothing like the preparations they had done. When the convoy appeared on the horizon, Thalia felt her breath catch in her throat. The convoy was heavily guarded, with armed soldiers stationed at every corner. But they were no match for the rebels' determination. The attack was swift, decisive, and brutal. Jaxon moved like a shadow, taking down enemy soldiers one by one, while Thalia coordinated the operation, making sure everyone was in position. There was no hesitation, no room for fear. This was their moment. As the convoy came to a halt, the rebels surged forward, overwhelming the guards. Thalia felt a rush of exhilaration as she saw the fear in the eyes of the Dominion soldiers, their carefully planned mission unraveling before them. It was a sight she had dreamed of for so long, but it was also a reminder of the price of freedom. They couldn't stop now. The convoy was destroyed, its supplies taken, and the rebels had made their first major strike against the Dominion. Thalia stood on the battlefield, her heart still racing, her breath coming in heavy gasps. She felt the weight of what they had just done, but she also felt something else, a sense of purpose. They had won, but this was just the beginning. Jaxon appeared beside her, his face grim but proud. "We did it," he said, his voice low. "But this is only the first step. There's more to come." Thalia nodded, her resolve hardening. "I know, and we'll be ready for it. We'll keep fighting until they know we're not backing down." As they made their way back to the rebel camp, Thalia felt a new fire burning inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading a revolution. And for the first time, she realized that the future she had once thought was impossible was now within her grasp. With Jaxon by her side and the rebels fighting for a cause they all believed in, there was no turning back. The fight for freedom was just beginning. The days after the victory over the Dominion convoy were filled with a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Thalia and Jaxon continued to lead the rebels, their actions growing bolder with each successful strike. Word of their victory spread quickly, and more people, both human and alien, came forward to join the rebellion. They were no longer a small group fighting in the shadows. They were becoming a force, one that the Tan Dominion could no longer ignore. Thalia felt a strange mix of emotions as she watched the rebels gather. She had once believed that freedom was a distant dream, something she would never see. But now, standing at the forefront of a revolution, she realized that freedom was something they could achieve. It was no longer just her dream. It was the dream of everyone fighting for their lives, their homes, and their future. One evening, as Jaxon and Thalia sat together outside their camp, looking out over the rolling hills beneath the stars, Jaxon turned to her. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "But this fight is far from over. The Dominion will retaliate. They won't just let us go." Thalia nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She knew he was right. The Tan Dominion wouldn't give up without a fight, and their victory was only a small part of the larger war that awaited them. But for the first time, Thalia felt ready to face whatever came next. "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But we've already proven that they can be beaten. We've shown them that we're not afraid, that we're willing to stand up and fight for what's ours." Jaxon smiled at her, his eyes full of admiration. "You're more than ready, Thalia. You've been ready all along." The next morning, as the sun began to rise, they received word that the Dominion was preparing to launch a counterattack. The rebellion's success had put them on the offensive, and now they would have to face the full might of the Dominion's forces. Thalia gathered the rebels, giving them one last pep talk before they set out to face the enemy. "Today, we fight for our freedom, for our families, for everything that we've lost," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "We've come this far, and we're not backing down now. Together, we can defeat them." The battle was fierce. The Dominion's forces were larger and better equipped, but the rebels had something the Dominion didn't: determination, heart, and the will to fight for a better future. Thalia and Jaxon led the charge, with Jaxon using his combat experience to guide the rebels in strategic strikes, while Thalia rallied them, her confidence and strength inspiring them to push forward. The clash between the two forces was deafening, but the rebels held their ground. Thalia fought with a fierceness she hadn't known she had in her. Every strike she made, every decision she took, was driven by the knowledge that this was her fight, her future, and the future of everyone who had ever been oppressed by the Dominion. After hours of fighting, the tide began to turn in their favor. The Dominion soldiers, though powerful, began to falter under the weight of the rebels' resolve. The Dominion's reinforcements arrived, but they were too late. The rebels had already secured a decisive victory. As the last of the Dominion forces retreated, Thalia stood on the battlefield, breathless but triumphant. She had led them to victory, and in doing so, she had become the symbol of everything they were fighting for. Jaxon stood beside her, a look of pride on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. "This is just the beginning, Thalia. The Dominion may have lost this battle, but there are more to come." Thalia turned to him, her heart swelling with pride. "I know, but now we know we can win." The rebellion had proven its strength, and Thalia knew that they were no longer just survivors. They were victors. As they made their way back to their camp, Thalia felt something inside her that she had never felt before: peace. They had fought for their freedom, and now they had a chance to build the life they had always dreamed of. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, Thalia wasn't afraid of the future. With Jaxon by her side and the rebels fighting for a common cause, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as she looked up at the stars above, Thalia realized that, for the first time in her life, she was truly free.